Super Rugby Australia is boring. That seems to be a lot what I've been reading on social media, hearing in the comments. Some places tell me they're not watching Super Rugby AU, but Super Rugby Aotearoa is seemingly the next best thing since sliced bread. How true, how fair is this? I've decided to have a wee look at the stats to see if we can kind of see any clear patterns between the two competitions thus far as to why after 2 rounds this game over here was being panned and this game over here in New Zealand after 2 rounds was being kind of lauded as really fun and exciting stuff. So I've not looked at all the Super Rugby Aotearoa games, just the first 2 rounds, so they were kind of on equal footing at the same time because, I mean, just from my reaction to observing other people's reactions, generally when this kicked off, everyone was pretty chuffed and pretty happy. Everyone was pretty positive. This, I've seen a lot of negativity from inside and outside Australia. So what do the numbers tell us? I've looked at some kind of key stats like tries, handling errors, offloads, and whatnot, so we can see, is there anything about the New Zealand games which after 2 rounds was looking really attractive, or anything about the Aussie game which after 2 rounds is looking really quite poor. So we will have a look. I will start, I should also point out, the weather is probably going to be a bit of a factor. I can't remember back. I know at least one of the games in the first 2 rounds, Chiefs Blues, was pretty wet. So that, when I looked at the stats for that game, they were pretty bad. But I think a couple of the games in AU have also been wet. You guys remind me if the other games were wet as well. I can't remember back that far for the Aotearoa games. But anyway, the first thing we're looking at is points scored. So if we're looking at Super Rugby Aotearoa, it's pretty much an average of 51 points a game over the first 2 rounds. Like 30 points to 20, 28, 27, 39, 25, 24, 12. Average scores in those games are 51 points. The Aussies are a bit lower, but not that much. It's not like night and day difference. They're on 46. So it's maybe worth, a couple of penalties or a try. So not like a stark enough difference to say, man, these guys aren't scoring any points, whereas the New Zealanders at the same stage were scoring loads. The Aussies have had a draw, 23 points to 14, 31-23, 32-26. So seemingly not a massive difference, but a slight difference there in favour of the Aotearoa games. With tries, though, average number of tries on Aotearoa after 2 rounds was 4.75 tries per game, if I don't round it. And for Australia, it's pretty similar. It's at 5. Average of 5 tries a game. So there's not that much in that. But if the Aotearoa games are scoring that many points, what that does mean, you can take conversions into account as well. But generally, the Aussie games don't have as many penalties. So the New Zealand games have averaged over the first 2 rounds 6 penalties a game, whereas the Australians, it was a similar number to the Kiwis for tries, 4.75. So that maybe goes against the stereotype because it's the Aussies that are scoring slightly more tries and the Kiwis that are kicking slightly more penalties. If you were going to divide these stats up into which ones are exciting and which one is boring, if you kind of covered those up, you may think maybe that's the Kiwis and that's the Aussies, but at this time it's not the case. For run meters, it's a similar story. The average run meters for the games, 676 run meters in the first 4 games of Super Rugby Aotearoa across both teams as the total. Like one example would be Blues Hurricanes was 386 to 417. So, seems to average out to about, to exactly 476. 767. 476, where did I get that from? And for the Aussie games, it's actually more. It's 824. So it's another weird stat where, looking at a glance, the Aussies seem to have another one which is clocking up a bit more. And I didn't put defensive stats on there, but at a glance, I think every team over the course of those 4 games on each side was tackling between 80 and 90%. I don't think anyone dropped below 80 and nobody got above 90. So all pretty similar. Kicks per game, I'm not sure if you count this as a boring stat because traditionally, like the All Blacks kick the ball quite a lot. Kicking can be an exciting way to get the game going. It's not necessarily just running like one-off runners who don't kick the ball. Those teams can be actually excruciating to watch. But yeah, you know what I mean. So kicks per game, the New Zealand games are averaging pretty much over the first 4 games 48 kicks from hand a game, and the Aussies, it is slightly more, although this one you've probably got to add a little bit of information that the Reds and Rebels game did go into Golden Point, and they had a ton of kicks in that game. Like, that game's total number of kicks was pretty high, like compared to all the other games, like 23 20 in one of the Tars and the Reds in that first round, but then 42-35 in that game, which went Golden Point. If you didn't see it, the Golden Point time was essentially kick for 10 minutes. So that would have added a lot, but still, that is what it is. However, where I think, because thus far, I don't think we're seeing anything that says, man, those Aussie games are so boring. I do think we do see a little bit of a trend here. When you look at handling errors, 12.5 per game for the New Zealand teams and 16.25 for the Aussie teams. I'm not sure that's a huge difference. If you put it into a percentage, it's maybe a fair percent higher, the increase from 12 to 16%. But also what it leads to is more of these, which the Aussie game's trying to get rid of, is the scrums. You got 7.5 and then you got 12.25 scrums. So more handling errors and more scrums. I think that number there, 12.25 compared to 7.5, that is maybe one of the big culprits as to why the Aussie games haven't been that fun. Now, I like, if you're a front row, you're probably screaming at me saying, bro, what's wrong with scrums? Scrums aren't boring. Yeah, they just slow the game down, I think. And it's funny because, you know, the Aussies have that rule that in Super Rugby AU, if it's held up in goal, it's a dropout. It's not a scrum. So if anything, they should have fewer scrums than Aotearoa. But they've got not quite double, but it's getting in that vicinity. So more handling errors, which directly leads to more scrums. And if you think about it, like each extra one, like you think at 5 more scrums a game, each scrum is probably around about 1 minute, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. And of those, how many of them had to be reset? I couldn't find stats on what's the average number of scrum resets like per scrum. I think I did find one stat, a really old one, before they did the crouch, touch, pause, engage, that it was like 50%. I think it's definitely lower since back in those days, but I don't know, 25-30% of scrums get reset, and some of them get reset after reset. That's probably... I mean, I'm not one of those haters who's trying to turn rugby union into rugby league by saying we need to get rid of scrums. But yeah, handling errors and scrums probably means a lot less ball in play time. Lineouts are pretty similar. It's 30 lineouts a game, 29 lineouts a game. So nothing really that flash there. Likewise, clean breaks, 17 clean breaks a game, 16 clean breaks a game. Like, you know, when a guy's out in the open, that's generally pretty exciting stuff. Offloads, I guess it goes slightly to the New Zealand game. 14 offloads to 10. But honestly, if I had to look at any of these numbers, I think the main ones that are costing the Aussies at the minute, it's the handling, it's the scrums, maybe the offloads. Like, that is, again, percentage-wise, that's a bit more. But overall, there's not that much else. The Aussies are still getting the tries. They're still getting a decent number of points. Kicking the ball a bit more. I don't know. I should say a couple of maybe external factors which aren't directly, on-field stuff. But this was the first rugby back, so I think everyone was pretty keen to see any rugby. The fact that it had full crowds as well, at least for those first 2 rounds, was also very pleasing. So it definitely had a bit of an extra feel-good factor to it. I didn't put penalties on here, but I remember the penalty counts in the first couple of weeks in Aotearoa were horrendous, like fantastically high, like in a bad way. So I didn't do the penalty numbers for these guys, but I'm assuming it would have been a lot less. That being said, I don't feel like the penalties got in the way of the games that much. The games were still very watchable. Now, is that because we were all deprived of rugby so long that we would have just taken anything? I don't think so, but you guys will have to give me your thoughts on that one. And these guys came on the back of Aotearoa's games, which is always a harder position to go second. And I think in Australia, NRL and AFL had been already back for a while. So it wasn't anything new or special to have sports back in Australia. So a bit more competition for them. But yeah, I'm not sure the Aussie games are as bad as everybody's making out. Are they at the level of the Aotearoa games? No, I don't think so. I think generally the Aotearoa games have been a bit easier on the eye. But that being said, if you watch the Hurricanes Chiefs game, you'll know it's not all been plain sailing. From memory, even that Highlanders Chiefs game, like although it had a really grandstand finish, the first half I seem to remember being a bit dry. But again, it was quite some time ago. So yeah, I don't know. The stats obviously don't tell you everything. They can't really account for how you feel watching a game. But I thought it was an interesting look, and for mine, those are the ones that kind of stick out. As maybe hurting the entertainment value of the games over there. But you guys let me know your thoughts. What do you reckon? Have you been enjoying both competitions? Are you not watching AU at all? Are you watching both? But yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.